a wonderful quote from Borges. I don't always like Borges. He's sometimes too, what is this? He's sometimes, how should I put it, too smart for his own good or whatever in this paradox. But he, in his short essay in Other Inquisitions on Kafka, Borges develops a wonderful idea. He says that with ordinary authors, you can play the game who were their influences. You know, like that idiot was influenced by Dostoevsky, this up and down. And his claim is, apropos Kafka, but not only Kafka, but truly great artists, it's not simply that they didn't have any predecessors, but that, how should I put it, but that a truly great author creates his or her precursors. That is to say, he says that we can say, of course, Kafka, you find traces in, we could play the usual game, William Blake, Dostoevsky, Edgar Allan Poe, whatever you want, and others. But his point is, yes, but we can see the way these guys had influence on Kafka only once Kafka is already here. That is to say, Kafka, how should I put it, it is Kafka himself with his achievement, now I'm back to Bergson, who put back into Edgar Allan Poe, Dostoevsky, and so on, as it were, the possibility of Kafka. So how, again, each new event, if it's an event, retroactively recreates its own possibility. And that's what Hegel calls totalizing. It's not we are just element in the totality. Totalizing rather means radically open contingent history. Totalizing means that here we touch what Hegel's mean with this absolute self-relating idealism. It doesn't simply mean you are influenced by the past. It means in a retroactive movement, you also change the past, of course, not the real past, but the past it exists now, putting into it the possibilities of the way it influences. Again, Dostoevsky didn't only influence Kafka. If it's only through Kafka that that dimension of Dostoevsky became discernible for us, and so on and so on. This is Hegelian totality. Of course, we have this atemporal totality all the time here, but this totality is all the time retroactively reconstructed, if you want to put it in this way. And that's the true historicity. The true historicity changes the past itself. So let's make a step further here before concluding for today. This brings us to the properly Hegelian relationship between necessity and contingency. We have the stupid common sense notion. If you ask people necessity, contingency in Hegel, the common idea is this so-called stupid dialectic of them, in the sense of the underlying structure of reality is necessary, but it realizes it in contingent ways. The classical boring example from the history of Marxism is the way that Russian first great Marxist Plekhanov explained Napoleon. He said, there was a historical necessity for the passage from republic to empire. But it was a contingent fact that it was exactly Napoleon. It could have been something, like necessity is a general tendency, or, this simple statistic game, sorry, I'm Berger guy, like we fuck each other, we multiply, but who fucks whom is contingent, but the general necessity, sorry, that's my nature, but that my only excuse is, once you can imagine teaching, where was it this, I think in Minneapolis, which is one of the capitals of political correctness, they attacked me, and you know what saved me? Their politically correct racism. I learned afterwards that at some committee they already thought of firing me, but then somebody says, listen, these guys come from Balkan, you know, race, and so on, you should understand it. At least racism for me, sorry. So, what I'm saying is that, so again, the standard notion is of the dialectics of necessity and contingency is simply that there is a necessity of contingency, in the sense of a global necessary tendency realizes itself through many contingencies, and a step further, that Hegel deduces also strictly the necessity of contingency, like why necessity has to realize itself, that's his whole philosophy of nature, externality, of notion, blah, blah, blah. But I claim this is only one side of Hegel. If you read Hegel really closely, you discover something much more radical. Not the necessity of contingency, but the contingency of necessity. That is to say, the Hegelian dialectical process is not a process which is in its overall structure necessary, but then it realizes itself through contingency. But if you read Hegel really closely, against the background of what I just developed, it's that something is not things become necessary, but things become necessary in a way which is ultimately contingent. In the sense that, for example, remember yesterday I quoted to you that wonderful example, if Balladur wins the election, it will be, his victory will be necessary, and so on and so on. That's how one should read also, and this is a nice example quoted by Dupuy and by Gérard Lebrun, a good reader of Hegel, crossing the Rubicon. Now, if you read Hegel in the wrong metaphysical way, is that it was eternally written in the destiny of Hegel, his fate, and it was all predestined. No, the idea is once Hegel contingently decided to cross Rubicon, his victory became necessary, how should I put it, no? This retroactive structure is crucial. Again, retroactive structure in the sense of course, at every historical point, we live in a totality which is necessary. But this necessary totality is all the time in a contingent way retroactively reconstructed. So that, again, necessity, okay, that's the crucial point. Hegel's narrative is not a necessary narrative, but is a narrative of the very rise of necessity. A narrative of how something in a contingent way becomes necessary. You wanted to, okay, immediately, just to finish the line. This is why, now you will say, but I'm dreaming. No, I know, this is why this brings me to my eternal point of obsession. This is why, for Hegel, he insists on monarchy, on constitutional monarchy. I think this is the most progressive, intelligent aspect of Hegel. He's not a reactionary Hegel. Hegel was well aware of something, that exactly what people attributed him is a nonsense. This idea of a totally rational state where everything is rationally regulated. The reason, and Hegel was aware that in order to have a rational totality, you have to have on the top a contingent element of the top. And this is how Hegel accounts for the king. The king is for Hegel an idiot. He says it openly. He says the function of the king is to sign his name and so on and so on. The less he knows, all the better. He basically repeats Kierkegaard here. You know this story. The Danish king asked Kierkegaard, what should the king know? And he expected Kierkegaard to tell him wisdom, no history. Kierkegaard told him good manners, nice smile, blah, 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 nothing more. So, Hegel's point is that you have state as a rational totality, but on the top you must have an element of radical contingency. That's why Hegel was against elections. For Hegel, elections were